I can't walk. Please. Her voice cracked as she grabbed his wrist, fingers trembling but tight like she refused to let go. Ethan Cole stopped cold, his boots sinking half an inch into the hot desert sand. He hadn't seen her until she moved. 1 second the land was empty, just red rock and heat waves. The next, she was there. An Apache woman, barely upright, her dress torn from travel, her breathing uneven. He looked down fast, scanning for danger, for a trap, for anything that didn't make sense. Something was wrong. Not just exhaustion, not just thirst. She shifted her weight and almost collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. Light. Too light. Like she hadn't eaten in days. Easy, he said, low and steady, though his eyes stayed sharp on the horizon. No movement. No riders. But something felt off. It always did right before trouble showed up. Her hand tightened again. They're coming, she whispered, barely audible. Ethan's jaw clenched. There it was. Trouble. He didn't ask who. Didn't ask why. He didn't need the details to understand the choice in front of him. Leave now, and he stays clean. Right away, and this becomes someone else's problem. Help her, and whatever is chasing her becomes his. He glanced at his horse. Strong, but already tired from 10 miles under a high sun. He glanced back at her, eyes sharp despite the weakness. Not broken. Not done fighting. That mattered. Can you stand? He asked. She tried. Failed. Her knees gave out again, and this time she didn't catch herself. Ethan exhaled once, slow. That was enough. Decision made. He slid an arm under her shoulders and lifted. She gasped but didn't pull away. Good sign. Still had fight in her. He moved fast, guiding her toward the horse, every step measured. Stay with me, he said. Don't drift. He boosted her up first, careful, then swung into the saddle behind her, one arm bracing her steady. Her head leaned back against his chest for half a second. Then she forced herself upright again. Pride. Even now. He respected that. The wind shifted. A faint line of dust appeared far off, low against the horizon. Ethan's eyes locked on it. Riders. No doubt now. And they were moving fast. How? Many, he asked. She didn't turn. Too many. Not helpful, but honest. He nudged the horse forward, then harder. The animal responded, hooves pounding dry earth. Distance was still on their side. For now. Why you? He asked. No answer. Just silence. Then, after a long second, she spoke again. If they find me, it won't stop with me. Ethan frowned. That wasn't fear for herself. That was something bigger. Something he hadn't signed up for. He adjusted his grip, steadying her as the horse picked up speed. The dust cloud grew. Closer now. Too close for comfort. He angled toward a line of rocks ahead. Limited cover. Bad ground. But better than open desert. He didn't look back again. Didn't need to. He could feel the pressure building behind them. Feel the clock running out. Then suddenly, her hand moved. Not weak. Not trembling this time. Firm. Deliberate. She pointed ahead. Not at the rocks. Higher. Ethan followed her finger, and his grip tightened instantly. Because whatever she saw up there changed everything. The horse slowed for half a second as the ground shifted under its hooves, loose rocks sliding beneath iron shoes, and Ethan tightened his grip instantly, pulling the reins just enough to keep balance without losing speed. His eyes locked on the ridge ahead where her finger had pointed, because something was there, something he had not seen before, and that alone made his pulse pick up. What is it? He asked, voice low but sharp, and she did not answer right away, her breathing still uneven but no longer weak, no longer fading. Something had changed in her posture, subtle but real, like she was holding something back, and that bothered him more than the riders behind them. The dust cloud was closer now. No question, maybe a quarter mile at most, closing fast, too fast for comfort, and Ethan knew open ground would not save them, not with one rider carrying extra weight, not with a horse already pushed past a long day's work. He angled harder toward the rocks, jagged formations rising, like broken teeth out of the desert floor, narrow paths, sharp turns, places where numbers did not matter as much, if he chose right, if luck stayed on his side. Talk to me. He pressed, guiding the horse into a tighter line. Who are they? A pause. Then finally, her voice came back, quieter now, but steady. Not bandits, she said, and that was worse, far worse, because bandits you could predict. Bandits wanted something simple. But this was something else. Ethan swallowed that thought, and kept moving, boots brushing against scrub as they cut between two low boulders, the path narrowing, forcing him to slow just enough to keep from breaking the horse's legs. Every second stretching thin. "Then why you?" he asked again, sharper this time, and she hesitated, just enough to confirm everything he feared. There was more here, something bigger than a woman lost in the desert. The first echo of distant voices carried on the wind behind them. Not loud, but enough to say they were close, closer than he wanted, and Ethan made a decision fast, pulling the horse off the open path and into a shadowed cut between taller rocks, a place where the sun barely reached and the air felt cooler, tighter, more controlled. He slid down first, boots hitting hard ground, then reached up to help her, expecting her weight to collapse again. But this time she held herself better, not strong, not fully, but not broken either, and that shift did not escape him. "Stay close," he said, guiding her behind a larger rock face, one that blocked direct view from the open desert, his hand resting near his belt, but not drawing anything. Not yet, because noise would end this fast. The riders passed somewhere beyond the rocks. He could hear the rhythm, steady, controlled, not chaotic, not desperate. They were searching, not chasing blindly, and that meant they knew the land, or they knew her, or both. Ethan leaned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse through a narrow gap, shapes moving, shadows crossing light, too many to count cleanly in a single glance, and his jaw tightened when he pulled back. She was watching him, not scared the way she had been before, but focused, measuring him, like she was deciding something, and that made him uneasy in a different way. "You said they cannot find you," he whispered, keeping his voice tight. "Why?" She held his gaze for a long second, then looked past him, back toward the ridge she had pointed to earlier, and slowly, she raised her hand again, not shaking this time, not weak, pointing to the high ground above them. And when Ethan followed that line, really looked this time, he saw it, just for a second, movement where there should have been none, still shapes against stone, watching, waiting, and suddenly the pressure shifted, because now he was not sure who was hunting and who had just walked straight into something far bigger than a simple choice in the desert. The moment Ethan saw the figures above the ridge, everything inside him shifted, not fear, not yet, but a clear understanding that he had stepped into something that was already in motion long before he arrived, and now there was no clean way out. He kept his body still, his breathing controlled, eyes tracking the faint outlines against the sky, barely visible, but real, watching, waiting, not moving like hunters, not rushing like the riders behind them, which made it worse, because stillness meant control. "Friends?" he whispered without looking at her. But the word felt wrong the second it left his mouth. She did not answer immediately, and that silence stretched, heavy, loaded with something he could not read. Then finally, "They are not yours," she said, calm now. Too calm for someone who had been collapsing minutes ago, and that alone told him the truth. She had known about them. She had led him here. Ethan's jaw tightened as the realization settled in. Not anger, not yet, but something close, something sharp. "You brought me into this," he said under his breath, not accusing, just stating what was now obvious. She turned her head slightly, enough for him to catch her eyes, steady, focused. "You chose to stay," she replied, and that landed harder than he expected, because she was right. He had made the choice. No one forced his hand. A distant call echoed from the open desert. The riders, closer now, splitting, spreading out, searching the rocks, and Ethan knew they would not stop, not until they found what they were looking for, or proved it was gone. He shifted his stance, stepping just enough to block her from the narrow gap in the rocks. Instinct, not thought, and he hated that part of himself for it. Hated how quickly he had taken responsibility for something he did not understand. "Start talking," he said, voice low but firm, "because I do not walk blind into a fight." And she inhaled slowly, steadying herself, not weak anymore, not the same woman he had lifted onto his horse. "They think I carry something," she said, choosing each word carefully, "something they cannot let leave this land." Ethan frowned, eyes narrowing. "Do you?" Another pause, shorter this time, then a quiet answer. "Yes." No hesitation, no excuse, just truth. And that made it worse, because now the stakes were clear, and they were bigger than a simple act of help. Ethan glanced back toward the ridge again, the watchers still there, unmoving, silent, as if waiting for something, for a signal, for a decision, maybe his. And suddenly he understood. This was the moment, the line he had already crossed. Without seeing it, "What is it?" he asked, but she shook her head slightly. "Not here," she said. And before he could press further, a shadow moved at the edge of the rocks, not above, not far, but close, too close. Someone else had already reached the edge of their cover. Ethan reacted instantly, stepping forward, placing himself between her and the opening, his hand lifting just enough to warn, not attack, not escalate, but ready, because now the situation had changed again, faster than he could control. The riders were not the only ones closing in, and whatever she carried, whatever she meant to both sides, had just turned him into something he had never planned to be. A man standing in the middle of a conflict he did not start, protecting a truth he did not yet understand. And as the shadow at the edge of the rock shifted closer into view, Ethan realized one thing with absolute clarity. There was no walking away now, only forward, and he still did not know who he could trust. The shadow stepped forward just enough for Ethan to see a face, calm, unreadable, not rushed, not afraid. And that alone told him this was no accident, no coincidence. This had been building long before he rode into it. The man lifted one hand slowly, not a threat, more like a signal, and Ethan did not move, did not lower his guard, his body still angled to shield her, because whatever this was, it was now his problem too. "You should not be here," the man said, voice steady, carrying no anger, only certainty, and that unsettled Ethan more than any shout ever could. "Neither should they," Ethan replied, nodding slightly toward the riders beyond the rocks, closer now, their presence pressing in from the other side, closing the space, tightening the air. The man's eyes shifted past Ethan, landing on her, and something changed, not fear, not relief, something deeper, something like recognition mixed with concern. "You were not meant to reach this far," he said to her, and she stepped forward before Ethan could stop her, not fully, just enough to be seen, her posture straightening despite the strain, despite the exhaustion still visible in her face. "I had no choice," she answered, and there it was, the crack in the story, the part Ethan had not heard yet, the part that mattered. The man studied her for a long second, then looked back at Ethan, measuring him now, weighing him, deciding something without saying it out loud. "You carry more than yourself now," he said, and Ethan felt that settle heavy in his chest, because it was true, whether he wanted it or not. Behind them, the sound of hooves shifted again, closer, spreading wider. The riders were not guessing anymore. They were narrowing in, and time was running thin. "Then tell me what I am standing in," Ethan said, voice lower, sharper, because he was done moving blind, done reacting without knowing the ground beneath him. The man hesitated, just for a moment, and that hesitation said everything. This was not simple, not something explained in a few words, not something clean. Before he could answer, she spoke first, cutting through the silence. "They took something from my people," she said, her voice steady now, stronger than before. "And they said if it leaves this land, they will take more." Ethan frowned, eyes flicking between them. "And you are the one carrying it out," he said, connecting the pieces, and she did not deny it, not even for a second. "They chose me because I would not stop," she said, and there was no pride in it, only weight, only truth. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the edges of the situation close and tighter, because now the stakes were clear. This was not about one woman running. This was about something bigger, something that had already hurt people, something that would again if it stayed where it was. The man by the rock stepped closer, just one step, enough to show he was not an enemy, but not close enough to be trusted either. "If they find her, they do not just take what she carries," he said, his voice quieter now. "They make sure no one tries again." And that landed hard, because it turned everything into a line, a single chance, a single path forward with no second attempt. The wind shifted again, bringing with it a clearer sound, voices now, not distant anymore. The riders were at the edge of the rocks, maybe less than 100 yards out, searching, closing, and Ethan felt the pressure spike. sharp and immediate. He looked at her again, really looked this time, at the strength she was holding together, at the cost already written in the way she moved, at the fact that she had been pushed into this long before he ever saw her, and something inside him locked into place. "Then we do not let them find you," he said. Simple, direct, no hesitation left, and both of them heard the decision in his voice. Final, irreversible. But the man did not nod, did not agree. Instead, his gaze shifted once more to the ridge above, to the silent figures still watching, and when he spoke again, it was softer, almost a warning. "It is no longer just about them finding her," he said. "It is about whether you understand what happens if she succeeds." And Ethan's grip tightened without him realizing it, because for the first time since this began, a new question cut through everything else, one he did not have an answer to. And as the first rider appeared at the edge of the rocks below, scanning, searching, too close now to ignore, Ethan realized he had made his choice without knowing the full cost, and there was no turning back. The rider's shadow stretched across the rock before his body fully appeared, and Ethan felt the moment tighten like a rope pulled too far, too fast. No room left to breathe, no space left to think. He shifted his stance again, one step forward, placing himself fully between her and the opening. No hesitation now, no half measure, just a clear line drawn in the sand that could not be erased. Behind him, she moved, not away, not hiding, but closer, and that alone sent a sharp signal through him. She was not running anymore. "Stop," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through everything. Firm, controlled, nothing like the broken whisper from before, and Ethan turned just enough to catch her expression, and what he saw there hit harder than anything else so far. Not fear, not panic, but resolve, deep and final. "What are you doing?" he asked, low, urgent, because something in her tone did not sit right. She looked past him, toward the rider now stepping fully into view, then back at Ethan, and for a second, the world narrowed down to just that look, steady, unshaken. "If they take me," she said. They stopped searching. Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. "No," he said, sharp, immediate, rejecting the idea before it could take shape. But she did not back down, not even a step. "You do not understand," she continued, and there was weight in every word now, years of it. "They are not hunting me because I am weak. They are hunting me because I chose to carry this." Ethan shook his head once, firm. "Then we keep moving," he said. "We find a way out." But even as he said it, he knew how thin that sounded, how little ground it held against what was closing in. The man by the rock watched in silence, his eyes moving between them, not interrupting, not stepping in, as if this moment belonged to them alone. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer, no longer distant, no longer a question. The riders were here, at the edge, seconds away from breaking through. She stepped closer again, close enough that Ethan could feel the shift in her breath, controlled, steady, deliberate. And then she did something he did not expect. She placed something in his hand, fast, precise, before he could react. His fingers closed around it. By instinct, rough edges, solid, unfamiliar. And when he looked down, just for a second, he saw it, small, wrapped, but clearly important, clearly the reason for everything. His head snapped back up to her, confusion and anger mixing in his chest. "What is this?" he demanded. But she did not answer that, not directly. Instead, she held his gaze and said the one thing he did not want to hear. "If I stay, you ride." Ethan's grip tightened around the object, his mind pushing back hard against what she was asking, because this was not just a choice anymore. This was a trade, her life for a chance, and he was supposed to accept that. "No," he said again, quieter this time, but no less firm. "That is not how this ends." But even as the words left him, the first rider stepped around the rock, close enough now to see, to recognize, to act, and everything sped up at once. The man beside them finally moved, just a shift, just enough to show readiness. But still he did not take control, did not decide for them. She leaned in closer to Ethan, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but every word landed clear. "You already chose when you lifted me," she said. "Now you choose if it meant something." And that hit deeper than anything else, because it stripped away every excuse, every delay, every attempt to stand in between. Ethan's chest rose and fell once, heavy, his eyes flicking from her to the rider to the ridge above, to the unseen figures watching, waiting, and for the first time since this began, he felt the full weight of it. Not just the danger, not just the chase, but the cost of doing what was right when right did not come with a clean answer. His hand tightened around what she had given him, and a single question burned through everything else. One he could not ignore, one he could not outrun. What happens if she is right? And what happens if he lets her go? The rider stepped closer, boots scraping against stone, eyes locked forward, and Ethan felt the last seconds of hesitation burn away under the weight pressing in from every side. The object in his hand felt heavier now, not because of its size, but because of what it meant, because of what she had just placed on him without asking, without waiting for permission. He looked at her again, really looked this time, and saw it clear, not fear, not doubt, but acceptance, like she had already made her choice long before he showed up, like this moment had been waiting for him to catch up. "You think I am riding away?" he said, low, almost a challenge, but she did not flinch, did not even blink. "I think you will do what matters," she answered, calm, steady, and that hit harder than any order ever could, because she was not telling him what to do, she was trusting him to decide. The rider shifted again, closer now, close enough that one more step would break whatever thin line still held, and behind him, more shadows moved, more shapes closing in from the edges, the pressure stacking fast, too fast. Ethan's chest rose once, deep, then settled, and something inside him locked into place, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet certainty that pushed everything else aside. He had seen this before, not like this, not with this weight, but the shape of it, the moment where a man decides who he is when no one is watching, when no one will praise him, when the outcome might not even be known. His grip tightened around the object, then loosened slightly, adjusting, securing it, not as something he was holding, but something he was carrying forward. He stepped back half a pace, just enough to change the angle, just enough to open space between them, and for a split second, her eyes searched his, looking for the answer before he spoke it. "You are not staying," he said, firm, final, no room left for debate, and she inhaled sharply, the first crack in her control. "You cannot," she started, but he cut her off, not harsh, just certain. "You said it yourself," he replied. "They stop searching if they think they have you." A pause, just long enough for her to understand where he was going, just long enough for the man by the rock to shift his weight, sensing the turn. Ethan glanced toward the ridge again, the silent watchers still there, and then back to the approaching rider. And in that space between two breaths, the plan formed. Not perfect, not safe, but enough. "So we give them something to find," he said, and now both of them were looking at him, the weight of his words settling in, changing the shape of the moment. The rider took another step, and this time Ethan did not hold his ground. He moved, not back, not away, but forward, stepping out just enough to be seen first, to draw the focus, to shift attention, because if they saw him, if they chose him, it bought her time. It changed the direction of the search. Behind him, she went still, completely still, understanding hitting all at once. And for the first time since he met her, her voice broke, just slightly. "Why?" she asked, and Ethan did not turn back, did not look at her when he answered. "Because you already chose for something bigger," he said. "Now I choose too." Simple, clean, nothing left unsaid. The rider's gaze locked onto him instantly, attention pulled, exactly as he needed. And Ethan felt the shift ripple through the space, the focus narrowing, the hunt redirecting, and with it came the consequence, immediate and unavoidable. He was now the one standing in front, the one being measured, the one who would carry the weight of what happened next. Behind him, he could feel her presence, still there, still holding, and the question that had been building since this began pressed harder than ever. Not if this would work, but what would happen after, what exactly she had placed in his hand, and whether walking forward now would lead him into something he could never walk back from. The moment Ethan stepped out from the cover of the rocks, everything changed, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a line had been crossed that could never be erased. The rider's eyes snapped to him instantly, sharp, focused, locking in like that was the only target that mattered now. And Ethan did not stop, did not hesitate. He took another step forward into the open, making himself clear, visible, impossible to ignore. "You are looking for someone," Ethan said, voice steady, carrying just enough to reach. And that was it. That was the action, the point of no return, because now the attention had shifted fully, completely, away from the rocks, away from her. Behind him, he could feel the silence tighten, could feel her not moving, not breathing too loud, holding on to the chance he had just created, and that made his next move heavier, sharper, because this had to work. The rider tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan, not rushing, not reacting with chaos. And that calm control told Ethan everything. These men did not panic. They did not guess. They observed. They decided. "You are not from here," the rider said, voice even, measured, and Ethan almost smiled at that, because it bought him a second, maybe two. "No," he answered, stepping another inch forward, keeping the line between them strong. "But I know trouble when I see it." The rider's gaze did not break, but something behind him shifted, more movement, more figures closing the distance, forming a loose line, not aggressive, not yet, but ready, and that alone spiked the pressure higher. Ethan felt the weight in his hand again, hidden, pressed against his palm, the object she had given him, the reason this was happening, and for a split second, the question hit again. What exactly was he carrying, and why did it matter this much? But there was no time for that now, no room to pull at that thread. "You should not be here," the rider repeated, slower this time, like he was testing the ground, testing Ethan, and Ethan met it head on. "Neither should you," he replied, and the words hung there, tight, dangerous, not loud, but enough. Behind the rider, one of the others shifted to the side, angling slightly, trying to see past Ethan, trying to look into the rocks, and that was the moment Ethan had been waiting for, the moment where a single action could either hold or break everything. He moved fast, just one step to the left, cutting off the angle, blocking the line of sight completely, forcing their focus back onto him, onto the man standing alone in the open instead of the shadows behind. It worked, but the cost hit immediately. The rider's posture changed, not aggressive, but firmer, more certain, as if a decision had just been made. "You are in the wrong place at the wrong time," the rider said, and Ethan heard the warning in it, clear, direct, but he did not step back, did not lower his stance, because stepping back now would undo everything, would pull the attention back to where it could not go. "Maybe," Ethan said, voice calm, controlled, "or maybe I am exactly where I need to be." And there it was, the line drawn deeper, sharper, no retreat left in it. The air tightened, the space between them shrinking without either side moving much, and Ethan could feel it building, the moment right before something breaks, right before the situation turns from words into something else. Behind him, he heard it, just barely, a small shift of movement, not loud, not obvious, but enough to tell him she was moving, taking the chance he had given her, and that alone forced him to hold steady, to keep them here, to keep their eyes on him. The rider's gaze flicked for a fraction of a second, not enough to see, but enough to sense change, and that was dangerous. That was where things could fall apart fast. Ethan did the only thing he could do. He stepped forward again, closing the distance by one more foot, pulling the focus tighter, sharper, forcing the moment to stay locked on him. "If you are searching," he said, slower now, deliberate, "you already lost what you were looking for." And that was the spark, the statement that could not be ignored, the move that turned suspicion into certainty. And as the rider's eyes hardened just slightly, as the line behind him tightened, Ethan knew the consequence had arrived. He had taken her place in the center of this, fully, completely, and whatever came next would come to him first. And behind him, unseen, unknown, she was slipping away with something that might change everything or destroy it. The rider's eyes sharpened the second Ethan spoke, and the shift was immediate, not loud, not chaotic, but precise, like a door closing behind a decision that had already been made. "No one loses something like that," the rider said slowly, his voice lower now, heavier, and Ethan felt it, the weight of those words landing exactly where they were meant to, because now they knew, not everything, but enough. Behind the rider, The line tightened. Men spreading just enough to close angles, not rushing, not panicking, just controlling space. And Ethan understood the danger in that kind of movement. It meant they were patient, and patience meant they were confident. He kept his shoulders squared, his stance firm, but inside, his mind moved fast, tracking time, distance, sound, anything that told him how far she might have gotten, how much of a lead she had gained, and whether it would be enough. You are standing alone, the rider continued, taking one slow step forward, and Ethan did not retreat, did not give an inch, because any sign of weakness would snap this fragile focus back toward the rocks. Not really, Ethan answered, and that was not just defiance. It was a gamble, a push to create doubt, to make them question what they could not see. The rider's eyes flicked for a fraction of a second toward the ridge above, toward the silent watchers still holding their ground, and that flicker told Ethan everything. There were more layers here than either side was showing, more players in this than just a simple pursuit. The wind shifted again, stronger now, carrying dust through the narrow space, stinging eyes, blurring edges, and for a moment, visibility dropped just enough to matter, just enough to create opportunity or disaster. One of the men behind the rider moved faster than the rest, stepping wide, trying to circle, trying to break the line Ethan had been holding, and that forced a response, immediate, sharp. Ethan pivoted, matching the angle, blocking again, refusing to let their view slip past him. You are protecting something, the rider said, and this time it was not a question. It was a statement, calm, certain, and Ethan felt the tension spike higher, because now the truth was out in the open, not spoken fully, but understood. His hand tightened slightly at his side, the object still hidden, still unknown to them, but not for long if this kept going. Maybe I am, Ethan said, slower now, choosing each word, because every second he held them here was a second she moved farther away, a second that might be the difference between success and failure, though he still did not know what success even meant in this. The rider studied him again, longer this time, as if measuring not just his words, but his resolve, his willingness to stand where he stood. And then something shifted, subtle but real. A small signal passed through the line behind him, not loud, not obvious, but coordinated. Ethan caught it, felt it, and a warning hit his chest hard. They were about to change tactics. The man to the right moved again, faster now, not rushing forward, but cutting toward higher ground, toward the ridge, toward the watchers, and suddenly the balance tilted, because if those two sides connected, if they aligned even for a moment, the search would expand, and she would be exposed. Ethan reacted without thinking, stepping forward again, raising his voice just enough to cut through the wind. If you keep moving like that, you are going to miss her completely. And that was the play, not truth, not certainty, but pressure, forcing them to hesitate, to question their direction. It worked for a second, maybe two. The rider lifted a hand slightly, halting the movement, eyes narrowing as he reassessed, and Ethan felt the window stretch, thin, fragile, but still there. Behind him, nothing, no sound, no signal, and that silence was both relief and fear, because it meant she was gone, or it meant something had gone wrong. The ridge above remained still, the watchers unmoving, unreadable, and Ethan realized he did not know which side they would choose when this broke, or if they would choose at all. The rider took one more step closer, close enough now that there was no space left to hide intention. You are buying time, he said quietly, and Ethan did not deny it this time, did not deflect. He simply held the man's gaze, because the truth did not matter anymore. Only the outcome did. The air tightened again, heavier than before, and as the wind died for a brief second, as the dust settled just enough to sharpen the edges again, Ethan understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was no longer about holding them here, it was about what would happen when they finally decided to move past him. And when that moment came, he would have to do more than stand. He would have to act, and he still did not know what he was truly protecting. The rider did not move for a long second, and that stillness felt heavier than any charge, heavier than any shout, because it meant he was deciding. And when a man like that decided, things changed fast. Ethan held his ground, but the space around him felt thinner now, tighter, like the air itself was closing in. Then it happened, small at first, The rider's hand lifted, just a few inches, and the men behind him shifted again. Not forward, not back, but outward, spreading wider, stretching the line, and Ethan felt it instantly. The control he had built was slipping. "You are right," the rider said, voice calm, almost quiet. "We are losing time." And that was not agreement. That was strategy, and Ethan's pulse kicked harder because he understood what came next. They were not going to stay focused on him anymore. One man moved left, another angled right. Both careful, both slow, but both creating new lines of sight. New angles that reached past Ethan's position, and that forced him to move again, step for step, blocking one, then the other. But he could not be everywhere at once, and they knew it. The wind picked up again, sharper this time, pushing dust through the rocks, cutting visibility just enough to make everything uncertain, and that uncertainty worked both ways. It hid her, but it also hid their movements. Ethan turned his head for half a second, just enough to check the ridge. The watchers still there, still unmoving. And that silence began to feel wrong, too quiet, too detached, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. "You cannot hold all sides," the rider said, and Ethan did not answer, because it was true, and truth did not need to be spoken twice. Another step, another shift, the line breaking into smaller pieces now, each man taking a different path through the rocks, testing space, testing distance. And Ethan felt the pressure spike again, sharper, more immediate, because this was no longer a single point of focus. This was a net, closing in. His mind moved fast, counting steps, measuring gaps, tracking movement through sound more than sight. And one thought kept pushing through everything else. How far had she gone? How much time had he actually bought? A faint sound reached him then, not from the riders, not from the wind, but from deeper in the rocks, a small shift. Almost nothing, but enough to tell him she was still moving, still using the chance he had created, and that single piece of confirmation steadied him, just enough to hold. "You are risking your life for something you do not understand," the rider said, closer now, just a few feet away, voice low but clear, and Ethan felt the weight of that truth again. But this time it did not shake him. It settled, firm, like something he had already accepted. "Maybe," Ethan replied, eyes never leaving the movement at the edges. "Or maybe I understand enough." And that was all he gave, because explaining did not matter, only holding did. One of the men broke pattern then, moving faster than the others, slipping between two rocks, cutting a line that would reach behind Ethan in seconds if not stopped, and that forced the next move, the one he had been trying to avoid. Ethan stepped hard into that path, closing distance fast, blocking not just the view but the movement itself, forcing the man to stop, to adjust, to lose momentum. And in that moment, the balance shifted again, just slightly, but enough. The rider's eyes hardened at that. Not anger, not yet, but recognition, and Ethan knew the next phase was coming. The moment where words ended and decisions turned sharper. Behind him, the ridge finally changed, just a flicker, just a hint of motion, where there had been none before. And that sent a new question through him. Were they stepping in or stepping back? The wind dropped suddenly, the dust settling, clearing the space. And with it came clarity, too much clarity, every position visible now, every angle exposed. And Ethan realized the truth he had been holding back. He could not keep this going much longer, not like this. The rider took one final step forward, close enough now that there was no distance left to hide behind. "You are running out of time," he said quietly, and Ethan did not answer, because he already knew. What he did not know was whether the time he had bought would be enough, or whether everything he had just risked would collapse in the next few seconds. And as another man found a higher path along the rocks, moving toward where she had gone, Ethan felt the moment tip, sharp and dangerous, because now it was not about holding them all. It was about choosing which one he would stop and which one he would let through. The man climbing toward the ridge moved faster now. No hesitation left, and Ethan saw it clear. That was the break. That was the point where everything would collapse if he did not act. Because once that man reached higher ground, once he saw the path she had taken, it would be over. Ethan's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice in front of him, sharp and final, because he could not stop all of them. He could not hold every line. He had to choose one direction and let the others fall where they would. The rider in front of him stepped even closer, close enough that Ethan could see every detail in his face. Calm, controlled, certain, and that certainty pressed hard, because it said one thing clear: they were about to move past him, with or without his consent. Step aside, the rider said quietly, not a threat, not raised, just a statement of what would happen next, and Ethan felt that moment hit. The last chance to walk away, the last chance to step back, and let this end without him standing in the middle of it. His grip tightened around the object in his hand, the edges pressing into his palm, grounding him, reminding him what was at stake, even if he did not fully understand it. Behind him, the faint sound came again, smaller now, farther away. She was still moving, still carrying whatever this was, and that single fact pushed everything else aside. Ethan made his decision. He stepped forward again, not back, not aside, but directly into the rider's path, closing the space completely, leaving no room between them, no gap to slip through, and in that movement, the line became absolute. The rider's eyes hardened just slightly, the first real shift, and the men behind him adjusted instantly, tension rising, the air tightening to a breaking point. "You are making this worse," the rider said, and Ethan did not deny it, did not argue. Because worse for who was no longer the question that mattered. "Maybe," Ethan answered, voice steady, "but I am not stepping aside." And that was it, the final line, the choice that could not be undone. To the side, the man climbing toward the ridge gained ground, moving higher, closer to seeing everything, and Ethan saw it out of the corner of his eye, the one path that could not be allowed, the one move that would end this. Time snapped tight. He could hold here, keep the rider in front of him locked, keep the group focused, or he could break, move, and try to stop the man reaching the ridge, but that would open the line in front of him, give the others exactly what they needed. Both choices carried loss, both choices carried risk, and there was no perfect answer, only consequence. His breath slowed, just once, just enough to clear the noise, and then he moved, not toward the ridge, not toward the escape, but deeper into the danger in front of him, forcing the rider to respond, forcing the entire line to collapse inward, to tighten around him instead of spreading out. It worked, immediate and sharp. The rider shifted to meet him, the others closing ranks, abandoning their wider search to deal with the man who would not move, who would not break. The space around Ethan shrank fast, pressure building from all sides. Every movement watched, every step matched, and now there was no doubt left. He had become the center of it, the obstacle that had to be dealt with. But as the line closed, as their focus locked fully onto him, something else changed. The man climbing toward the ridge slowed, hesitated, pulled back slightly, uncertain now without the support of the others. And that hesitation was everything. Ethan felt it, the shift he had been fighting for, the one moment where her path might stay hidden, where her chance might survive. But the cost was clear, the circle around him tightening, the distance gone, the options narrowing to almost nothing. And as the rider held his gaze, just inches away now, Ethan felt the full weight of it settle in. This was the point where everything would turn, where whatever came next would decide not just what he had done, but what it meant. And he still did not know if the thing in his hand was worth the line he had drawn, or if he had just stepped into something that would take everything from him before it was over. The space around Ethan tightened until it felt like the desert itself had closed in on him, every direction blocked, every movement watched, and for a moment, it seemed like the end had already been decided. The rider stood inches away now, calm, unshaken, like a man who knew he had already won, and Ethan held his ground, not because he believed he could break through, but because stepping back was no longer part of who he was. Then something shifted, not in front of him, not in the line, closing around him, but above, on the ridge, where the silent watchers had remained still for too long. One of them stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and this time there was no mistaking it, no blending into the rocks, no hiding in shadow. The rider's eyes flicked upward, just for a second, but that was enough. Enough to break the perfect control he had held, enough to crack the moment open. More figures appeared along the ridge, not rushing, not attacking, but present now, visible, undeniable. And Ethan felt the shift ripple through the men around him, small, subtle, but real, their focus splitting for the first time. "You waited too long." A voice carried from above, strong, steady, not loud, but clear enough to cut through everything below, and Ethan turned his head just enough to see, really see, who had been watching all along. They were not bystanders, not neutral. They were Apache, standing tall, controlled, not weak, not scattered, but organized, deliberate, and in that moment, everything changed. The rider's posture tightened, just slightly, and that small shift told Ethan more than any words could. This was not part of their plan. This was not something they expected to face. "This does not concern you." The rider called back, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge, and the man on the ridge did not move, did not react with anger, only with certainty. "It concerns what was taken," he answered, and the words landed heavy, deeper than before, because now the truth was no longer hidden between whispers. It was out in the open. Ethan felt it then, the full shape of what she had said earlier, what she had carried. This was not just an object, not just something small and personal. It was something tied to her people, something taken, something that had to be returned. His hand tightened again around it, the weight now clear in a way it had not been before. The rider's gaze snapped back to Ethan, sharper now, more direct, and for the first time, there was something behind it. Not fear, but urgency. "Give it to me," the rider said. And this time it was not a suggestion. It was a demand, quiet but absolute. Ethan did not answer right away, his mind racing, connecting pieces, the woman's words, the watchers, the pursuit, and then the realization hit, hard and clear. She had not just been escaping. She had been delivering something back, something that mattered beyond her own life. Behind him, the rocks remained silent, no sign of her, and that silence told him she had made it farther than they expected, farther than they could easily follow. The man on the ridge stepped forward again, closer to the edge, and now there was no doubt. His presence alone shifted the balance, not through force, but through meaning, through what he represented. "The choice is no longer yours," he said, looking not at Ethan, but at the rider, and that line landed like a break in the ground, because it changed everything. It moved the conflict beyond one man's decision. Ethan felt something settle inside him then, something steady, something that had been building since the moment he chose to help her, and for the first time, the weight in his hand felt right, not heavy, not uncertain, but exactly where it belonged. He opened his hand slightly, just enough to feel the edges again, and when he looked back at the rider, there was no hesitation left, no question in his stance. "You are not taking it," Ethan said, and this time it was not defiance, not resistance. It was clarity, and the moment he spoke it, he knew the line had fully shifted. The men around him did not move yet, but the tension changed, not closing in anymore, but holding, waiting, balanced on something new. Above, the figures on the ridge stood firm, and for the first time since this began, Ethan was not alone in the space he had chosen to stand in. But the question remained, sharp and unresolved. What exactly had he protected, and what would it cost when this moment finally broke? The silence that followed felt different, not empty, not tense in the same way, but shifting, like the ground itself had decided to settle after being pushed too far. The rider did not move for a long second, his eyes locked on Ethan's open hand, on the truth now impossible to deny. And for the first time, the certainty in his posture cracked, just slightly, but enough. Above them, the Apache on the ridge stepped forward again. More of them now, not rushing, not aggressive, but present. Undeniable, their stance firm, their eyes steady, and the balance that had once leaned so heavily against Ethan now began to tilt. "It returns where it belongs," the man on the ridge said, his voice carrying down with quiet authority, and those words did not just fill the air, they settled into it, grounding it, shifting the meaning of everything that had happened. Ethan felt it then, not just the release of pressure, but the weight of the choice he had made finally landing somewhere real, somewhere beyond himself. The rider exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting for a brief moment toward the ridge, measuring, recalculating. And when he looked back at Ethan, something had changed, not defeat, not surrender, but recognition, a silent understanding that the moment had moved beyond his control. "You do not know what you carry," he said quietly, And this time it was not a threat. It was something closer to a warning, something unfinished, and Ethan held that look without answering, because he already knew that part was true. Behind him, a soft sound broke the stillness. Footsteps, careful but steady, and Ethan turned just enough to see her stepping out from the rocks, no longer hiding, no longer running. She moved slowly, still worn from the journey, but upright, strong in a way that had nothing to do with strength alone. And when her eyes met his, everything that had been unspoken between them settled into that single moment. She walked past him, not hurried, not afraid, crossing the space he had held, and for a second, Ethan felt the distance she had traveled, not just through the desert, but through everything that had led her here. When she reached the open ground, the figures on the ridge shifted again, descending now, not all at once, but enough to close the space between her and them. And in that movement, the story changed from escape to return. The rider watched it happen, his men holding position, no longer pressing forward, no longer searching, and that alone was the proof. The chase had ended, not because they failed, but because the moment had moved beyond pursuit. Ethan looked down at his hand one last time, then stepped forward and placed the object into hers. No hesitation, no doubt, and as her fingers closed around it, something in the air shifted again, softer this time, quieter, like a long-held breath finally released. She held it close, not as something fragile, but as something restored, something that had been taken and was now back where it belonged. And when she looked up at him again, there was something new there, not just gratitude, not just relief, but recognition, deep and steady. "You did not walk away," she said, her voice calm, but carrying more weight than anything else she had spoken. And Ethan gave a small nod, not needing to say more, because there was nothing left to explain. The Apache from the ridge reached her. Then, forming a quiet circle around her, not closing her in, but standing with her. And in that moment, her place was clear, not as someone running, but as someone who had returned with something that mattered. Ethan stepped back slightly, the space between them growing again, but it felt different now. Not distance, not separation, but something open, something that had been built through everything that had just happened. The rider turned at last, his decision made, his men following without question, the line breaking, the pressure easing. But as he walked away, he spoke once more, not loud, not turning back. "This is not the end of it." And the words lingered, not as a threat, but as a truth that had not yet unfolded. Ethan watched them go, the desert quiet again, but not the same, not after what had been set in motion. And when he looked back toward her, toward the people now gathered around her, he realized something else had changed, something he had not expected. He had stepped into their story, and somehow, it had become part of his too, even if he did not yet understand how far it would reach. The desert grew quiet in a way Ethan had never felt before, not empty, not lifeless, but settled, like something that had been out of place had finally returned where it belonged. And for the first time since this began, he let his shoulders drop just a fraction. The Apache stood around her, not crowding, not guarding, but present, a circle of quiet strength that spoke louder than any words, and at the center of it, she held the object close, not hidden, not feared, but restored, like it had always been meant to come back to this moment. Ethan watched her for a long second, taking in the way she stood now, no longer the woman struggling to stay upright in the heat, no longer the one reaching out with a trembling hand, but someone grounded, someone who had carried something heavy and seen it through. She turned then, her eyes finding him again, and this time there was no urgency in them, no fear, only something steady, something that lingered deeper than gratitude. "You changed more than one path today," she said softly, and the words stayed with him, not loud, not dramatic, but real in a way that settled into his chest. Ethan gave a small nod, not out of pride, not out of certainty, but because there was nothing else to say that would not lessen what had already been done. The wind moved again, lighter now, carrying the heat across the open ground, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal, almost like the desert had erased what had just happened. But Ethan knew better. He could feel it. Something had shifted, something that would not simply fade with distance. One of the elders stepped forward beside her, his presence calm but unmistakable. and he studied Ethan in silence, not judging, not questioning, just seeing, and after a long moment, he gave a single nod, small but clear, a gesture that carried more meaning than any spoken thanks. You stood when it mattered, the elder said, his voice steady. That is remembered. And those words did not feel like praise. They felt like a mark, something placed on him whether he asked for it or not. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, glancing once toward the path where the riders had disappeared, their presence gone, but not forgotten, and the warning they left behind still hung in the air, quiet but certain. They will come back, Ethan said, not as a question, but as a truth, and the elder did not deny it. Some things do not end in one day, he replied, and that answer carried its own weight, not heavy with fear, but with acceptance. Ethan looked back at her one last time, and for a second, the distance between them felt smaller than it should have, like everything that had passed between them had built something that did not need words to exist. She stepped closer, just one step, enough, to close that space, and placed her hand lightly over his for a brief moment, not holding, not asking, just acknowledging, and then she stepped back again. If you had walked away, she said, her voice calm, none of this would be here. And Ethan let that settle, because it was true, simple and undeniable. He turned then, slow, deliberate, his boots pressing into the same ground that had nearly taken him hours before, and began to walk back toward his horse, each step carrying him away, but not fully out of it. Halfway there, he paused, just for a second, and looked back, and what he saw stayed with him. The circle still holding, the object no longer lost, and her standing at the center of it, no longer running, no longer alone. He exhaled once, steady, then turned forward again, but the question did not leave him. It followed him into the open desert, quiet but persistent, not about what he had done, but about what it would lead to next, because some choices do not end when the moment passes, they begin there. And as the horizon stretched out ahead of him, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was not the last time their paths would cross, and when they did, the cost might be even higher.